Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Data Unchained. I'm your host, Molly Presley. Let me tell you a little bit about this podcast if you're new to the show. So if you think back into the data-generated world that we live in, all the way back maybe even to mainframes, where the idea of data was generated in a building that was dedicated to a computer, the people running the computer, and the people using the data around that computer. Through the past couple of decades, everything has become much more decentralized. We have the ability to generate data in devices at the edge, in our cars, and our phones. We have cloud computing and the idea of service providers that are hosting GPUs now, and everything has become increasingly decentralized. This is the area that we focus on in Data Unchained, is what are some of the challenges around such a decentralized world, as well as the opportunities or the insights that are hidden within that data. So let me introduce you to today's guest. Jamal Khan is the Chief Growth and Innovation Officer at Connection Inc. He's also the head of the Helix Center for Applied AI and Robotics. Jamal, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Molly, for having me on the show. And I know that title is a little bit of a mouthful, so good job.
Thank you. So, but there's a lot to unpack there, definitely, in your experience and what you're doing in this world of data and analytics and AI. So before we talk about work, maybe tell us a little bit about your background, what led you to the position you have over at Connection Inc.
That can probably take about 45 minutes, the duration of the podcast, but I'll give you a quick Cliff Notes version. Software engineer by trade, craft, and education, and started working on Wall Street building equity trading platforms in the late 90s. And then got involved with a startup in those days called VeriSign. Found myself working for them for 5 years, saw that company grow reasonably well, and worked in different capacities there. And then, at the tail end of my time at VeriSign, which was about 5 years, figured I'd had enough liquidity of my own to get myself into trouble and started building tech companies. And went through that process. I've had built multiple tech companies, and the last one that got acquired by Connection was through an acquisition of a company where I was the chief executive for about 7-8 years prior. That was a company called GlobalServe, which is today Connection's global subsidiary. It's basically the arm of Connection that allows our multinational customers, procure IT assets and services around the world in about 170 countries. My involvement in AI began in the early 2000s, and this was primarily post 9/11, around what's called threat intel aggregation, specifically around what's called human contextual threat intelligence. And the challenge that we were trying to solve there was there was a significant amount of data that was being captured and required some level of what we today call natural language processing on that data, so we could extract meaningful insights from that human contextual data set. And subsequent to that, I worked on other AI platforms and systems. I have 6 patents in AI. And at Connection, I have a pretty broad mandate, but one of the areas that excites me and probably takes most of my time now is running our Helix Center for Applied AI and Robotics. For those of you who don't know much about Connection, we are a public company, about $4 billion in gross revenue. Almost 35,000 plus customers, primarily focused in North America. And within Connection, we provide a broad set of professional services, managed services, cybersecurity services, as well as a single source provider for product as well. Helix is a culmination of sorts of a 5-year journey within Connection around its own data strategy and AI efforts. And we've now commercialized that capacity and capability for our customers that want themselves to go down that data and AI journey. And I'm trying to spearhead that effort.
I always applaud entrepreneurs who are entrepreneurs because that's difficult to be successful with. But it sounds like you've had a lot of success there, and getting the company bought by Connection is a big deal. So congratulations. I've never quite had the guts to go off and do something like that. I'm always impressed by people who do.
It was a long there was a long conversation with my wife before I went down that path. Let's just say that.
I bet, fraught with risk for sure. But yes. That's really cool. And then I think it's interesting for a lot of folks in the AI world right now that are just becoming more aware of it, to hear from folks like you who have actually been in it for, a while. You mentioned early versions of LLMs that were being used to process, for cybersecurity reasons and whatnot. Maybe talk a little bit about that. How have you seen AI come to fruition in this market? What was happening 10 or 20 years ago in AI that now has led to such a frenzy of activity?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And by the way, I've often asked that question. Also is one of the core theses in one of the courses that I lecture, which is a grad level course at Columbia, which is the convergence of why there's such a significant hype around artificial intelligence today. When we worked in AI 15, 20 years ago, it was a field that was fraught with a lot of scar tissue, with limited results. Some of those NLP systems that we engineered and designed were at best providing us with 60, 70% efficacy in terms of their results, which was, again, better than a flip of a coin. And that's what we were trying to shoot for. Can we consistently have our algorithms perform at a score value better than 50%? And that was good enough. But what's happened since then, and specifically since 2017, we've seen this tremendous amount of innovation in what we call AI algorithms. And in large measure, when you think about generative AI and large language models, you specifically can speak to the transformer neural network process, which was engineered by Google Brain in 2017. And what you see today in large measures coming out of the TNN process. So there was this specific innovation that happened in 2017 that's given rise to a lot of the contemporary Gen AI systems. You combine that with this tremendous amount of toolkitting and some almost democratized tech stack that never existed 15, 20 years ago. Whether it's PyTorch, whether it's TensorFlow, you've got these broad ecosystems that exist that were never there. And so now you can have a high school graduate or somebody who's in the senior year do emotion analysis detection through computer vision on the basis of some very simple libraries, something that we could not even imagine 15, 20 years ago. The third area, which is infrastructure, right? With GPUs, the ability to have that perfect business application, which is whether it's computer vision, whether it's NLP, GPUs naturally, and their application in this space naturally give us the ability to get results much quicker and faster. I remember 20 years ago, we would almost have to wait for a day and a half, 2 days before we would come back after our models had run some inference execution on a certain data set and find that our models were still bad, fine-tune them, have our CPUs run, and then come back again after a day to see what the results were. Those same calculations and processes can now be engendered literally in minutes. So that has significantly helped. The fourth area is data explosion. Immense amounts of data that are now becoming the proverbial currency for businesses. So all companies, there's this economic and strategic driver on the parts of businesses to extract value out of that data. So there's this massive business case that how do we apply AI? So you're seeing that underlying process as well. So I think it's this perfect storm that is on the basis of the convergence of these 4 or 5 different areas that's giving us this hype and this push in this direction.
That's a great answer. And before we jump into some of the topics we were planning to talk about, I'm curious, as a university professor and your experience in this space, if you were recommending where folks should be getting educated in this space, what kind of degrees or what kind of education will help to position them? Because it's moving so quickly. And I think students who are investing in education have a hard time knowing what will be the valuable skill set a year or 2 from now. Do you have any insight into that?
Sure. Just one clarity. I'm a guest lecturer. I'm still not a university professor. That would be something I would love to do at some point, perhaps in my career. But I'm often invited as a guest lecturer to schools and have been at Columbia now for a few years.
Amazing.
I think that's a question that's absolutely asked of me, and I have a hard time giving a really clear, distilled answer to it. And there are a couple of reasons for it. One, I look at my own personal journey and some of the journeys of my own cohorts that we would sort of classify as AI practitioners. And we've gone through this school of learning that has in large measure been driven out of actual applied application of AI and what that represents. And our ability to deliver on that was on the basis of a certain set of skill sets that we developed, right? And that skill set straddled a whole broad set of areas. There's certainly a software development skill set that's at play. In contemporary times, when you're thinking about an AI practitioner, you're certainly looking at someone who's skilled in some of these newer frameworks like TensorFlow, like PyTorch, have some command over Python as a language, and so on and so forth. But then there's also a lot of skills and knowledge that's tapped through our experiences on the infrastructure side of things as well, which is how do we collect data, where do we collect data, where are those right points for inference where you've got to have those smart edge systems. Then there's subject matter level of expertise. So as you can begin to see, as you try and unravel the answer, which is what is that standard of instruction that makes you a good AI practitioner, there's no specific answer. It's a general, deep knowledge. The only thing I do tell, and I say this to my kids as well, is whatever you do, try and be the best in the world at that trade craft. So whether you are trying to be a software engineer, you've got to really get deep. And by deep, that means understand the mechanics. One thing I often, and this may be a little bit of a rub to some of the more contemporary software engineers out there, when we would develop software 15, 20 years ago, we were using systems like VI and Emacs. We did not have meaningful, what we call IDEs. And IDEs in large measure make the art of software development much simpler and easier. And though I'm not questioning the importance of having IDEs, and now today, generative code generation systems like GitHub, Copilot, and other systems that can generate code for you. There's nothing wrong with that. But when we didn't have those, it required us to understand how systems worked at an abstraction level that I don't think a lot of engineers today are forced to understand. And maybe they'll work. They'll still be productive. They'll still build great tools. But I think there's a lost trait there that has just been a function of how these systems have become much smarter and easier. For us to build a simple, two-way bidirectional communication socket program, we really needed to understand to the nth degree what a layer 4 socket interaction looked like, and how would you communicate that, and how would you design that in C or C++. Though that's not important today, but I still feel that gives us a more deeper insight on how systems work that eventually make us better engineers on how we build products and solutions.
I think that's a great answer. And thanks for sharing that. I think I've heard feedback as I've been at events and people saying, oh, you're the Data Unchained person, which is kind of interesting that, people start to recognize, the guests from this show and are following the show. And often it's university folks who are saying, hey, I'm embarking on this career. Should I go be a data scientist? Should I be a developer? And then the question comes up a lot. So I think you're just a great person to share some of your insights. So thanks for doing that. So let's talk about Connection. Tell us, it's a large company. What's the overall mission of the company? And then let's talk a little bit about how you see, from your lens, where AI is being adopted, which markets, which use cases.
So, in the broader sort of scope of things with respect to Connection, I will distill this down in very simple terms. We're trying to sort of calm the confusion of IT. I mean, that's fundamentally our vision and our direction. We tend to try and simplify how IT is adopted and integrated to provide enhanced value for our customers. There's a very strong focus on the centrality of the customer. So we're very much oriented in terms of what it is that we want to build in terms of final outcomes that have meaningful ROI for our customer partners. So that's Connection's view. And again, we're a Fortune 1000 company, we're a public company, 4 billion, 2,700 employees. And again, 30,000 customers primarily focused out of the US. Some of them have multinational or footprint, and we provide them support around the world in terms of product procurement, services, you name it. It's a full single source company that provides and helps partner with our customers. With respect to artificial intelligence, AI again is a longer journey or a longer story than people might think. As an industry or as AI adopters, AI is an area that we've been working on now for 50 plus years. And we've gone through what are called these peak and trough cycles within AI, where there's been this great hype that AI is about to solve some sort of a meaningful challenge. In the 70s and 80s or 60s, there were these expert systems around healthcare diagnosis. We had a whole bunch of systems around NLP, especially around the Intel community. And those ended up being busts. There was great hype, and they didn't bear any fruit. And so we've seen these hypes and trough, or sort of peaks and trough cycles within AI. But I think there's something different now in large measure. And I think you've got to look at AI as part of that process, which is mostly driven by automation. And in the 80s and 90s, we've seen immense automation in the manufacturing ecosystem. I don't want to sort of get into a political discourse, but there's always this argument about, hey, we've been outsourcing a lot of our jobs externally. But I think when you really peel the onion and you look at where a lot of jobs have gone, especially in the manufacturing segment, they've gone to automation. Our industrial productivity, as in the US, has consistently gone up. And it has, however, the labor force has plateaued. But a lot of that has to do with automation. So whether it's the automotive industry, where we've brought in industrial robots, whether it is, now in the case of leveraging AI for predictive maintenance, for assembly line automation in manufacturing, beyond even automotive industry, automation has been sort of that drive. AI is now making automation intelligent. And yes, you can see this journey connected, but AI is very distinct. So, for example, in banking and financing, if you looked at it historically, you could think of the early automation as in banking processing, transaction processing, or data processing. And banks usually did that in batch processes overnight. Now you're seeing AI extend that into doing things like KYC, AML, anti-money laundering, fraud detection. You're looking at algorithmic trading, quant systems that are more automated. You're looking at in retail, for example, what may have begun as very simple checkout processes that were somewhat automated to now personalized shopping that follows a user from offline to store interaction and how they interact at a retail store. So again, I think the verticals are across the spectrum. Healthcare has been a big adopter of AI technologies for a while, whether it's in diagnostics or personalized medicine. And then again, within the healthcare system, it has a whole set of different markets. When you go into the drug discovery process or the vaccine manufacturing process, those are now heavily leveraging, molecular simulation systems that are AI driven that can really compress the time for a drug to be discovered or a vaccine to be built. So we're seeing AI across the spectrum in different verticals being adopted, but it's generally been a journey where initially it was an automation effort, and now it's becoming an intelligent automation effort.
That's pretty fascinating. I've had conversations that, like you said, not getting into a political conversation, but I come out of the supercomputing world where there was a lot of fight for whoever had the biggest supercomputer as a nation had the most power. And that infrastructure side of the world talks, and so China would say, oh, we're at the top, and then the US would put one at Los Alamos and they'd be at the top, and there was a battle back and forth. And in that infrastructure side of the world, there's that conversation of whoever owns the most GPUs now can consider that as a part of their national power. And that complement of automation makes perfect sense and is a little bit less infrastructure centric. And I've seen that in those exact same conversations and just not really distilled it out. So I find that an interesting comment of the speed of automation, time to results, using things efficiently, humans, infrastructure, all of that. It's a really great comment. But it also kind of begs the question of, okay, how do you build this? And you and I were talking about what does a quality AI framework look like? How do you build this as a company or an organization so that you can take advantage of automation, compute, data? How do you get started as an organization?
Again, I think a very complex question because it straddles everything from culture, strategic support from a board level at a senior level, truly having the leadership within any organization understand the seminal moment we all find ourselves in. I think there's often this analogy that's thrown out there. It's the new industrial revolution. Well, you perhaps accurate in some respects. I think perhaps not in scaling terms. I think this is going to have a far more meaningful impact on societies as a whole. So having that cultural understanding of the fundamental ethos of what AI means for us as individuals, as societies, as businesses is almost the starting point. If you've got a leadership that is failing to understand the speed and velocity of this impact that's going to hit all of us, then you're going to be challenged. You will not be able to build those key systems. And so I think that, for me, has always been the corner anchor on which it's important. So I spend a lot of time internally within Connection, constantly litigating this issue and trying to get our leadership to truly understand how this is likely to impact us. And I know Michael Dell often also uses this terminology, which is I'm competing with the company that's going to disrupt me. And so what is the challenge for all of us as leaders within organizations? How do we build a company that's going to take us out of business? And AI and automation is going to be a cornerstone component to it. But if you then move into sort of the mechanics of what those key subsystems are, there's certainly, the what I would call the tech stack. And the tech stack ecosystem are the data management systems. You've got the modeling and algorithmic development. You've got the infrastructure that you're deploying that system on. You've got performance monitoring that's monitoring how your AI systems are performing. And then you've got the audit systems that are auditing and providing feedback. Then on top of that, you've got the controls ecosystem. And in the controls ecosystem, you're looking at your access control. Do the right people have access to the right data sets? Do the right people have access to the AI algorithms so they can adjust them and manipulate them? Data privacy concerns across all of the guidelines and frameworks that exist there, the policies that you might have. You may be a heavily regulated industry, so you've got to understand the sensitivity of what that means. Error handling and recovery. AI systems are not error prone. They are, whether it's hallucination or other errors that are caused by what's called model drifts or overfitting of models. Those are significant issues. So you may think your models are working perfectly fine, but they've slowly drifted to giving inaccurate answers. And now if you've built a model that's deciding who to give loans to on a certain interest rate, and you're doing that on a model that's overfit or has drifted, you're making improper answers. And 6 years from now, someone's going to identify that as an issue. And guess what? You're likely opened yourself up to some sort of a class action lawsuit because for 6 years, you've been making improper loan considerations. And then, there's core sort of infrastructure mechanism challenges. How can you scale it? How can you do this in an efficient fashion that's cost effective? Because AI is both a hog from a processing capacity perspective and energy capacity perspective. So how do you design your systems that are highly efficient? Where are your version controls? And then there are a whole broad set of technical underpinnings. So again, not a single answer that sort of fits everything neatly. It starts off with having the culture that truly believes that we're at a seminal moment that's going to impact us, and is going to impact us in a very compressed time, not like the Industrial Revolution that took 100 years to play itself out. This is going to impact us in the next 10, 15 years. And then from that come all of those considerations, whether it's controls, mechanisms, technical underpinnings, key subsystems that need to be developed. All of those constitute part of that journey of making yourselves or making for your organization effective ecosystems for AI.
Yep. Yeah. So I think that one of the challenges organizations come across is who's going to champion that role. That sounds like you're taking that connection of having these conversations and facilitating the different levels of policy, governance, security. Is there an evolving role that you see all organizations must have, or are people kind of taking the bit in their mouth and just designating themselves? How do you think organizations are doing that?
Yeah, so excellent question again. And I see this disparity of maturity, right? So in some cases, businesses that have had a longer foresight in terms of what AI means or automation in general means for them, right? So again, I keep using the term automation because I think a lot of these efforts begin there. How do we bring in more automation and efficiency? And an outcropping of that is now artificial intelligence. For those companies that have been mature, have been doing this for a while, they've built meaningful centers of excellence. They've got the right leadership structures. They've started defining these new roles like the chief AI officer or the chief data officer, the CDOs. In other organizations, there are folks who are moonlighting these roles, right? So you could have a CISO that's really well versed and is building strong governance control standards around how AI is being implemented in those organizations. You've got to have perhaps the heads of engineering, software development, who are really helping design and develop local LLMs because a portion of their team members are now, building that skill set and capacity. So again, I think it depends on the maturity of an organization. You can have really well-defined roles like CAIOs and CDOs who are championing this effort, usually working in concert with the CEO of the company, again, for companies that really understand the importance of this. And then you've got other instances where you'll have existing roles that are moonlighting and driving this effort through that process.
So maybe taking a step down and talking about data a little bit, you mentioned when we were first getting started in the conversation about, one of the, I think it was the fourth pillar you were talking about of what there's some opportunity in is the data and what's hidden within it and how you can, put it to work in these infrastructures and these frameworks. Do you see an evolving role related to data, somebody who is overseeing all the data an organization has and figuring out where to put it and how to use it? Have you seen kind of an analog to that?
I think that evolving role sort of exists within the CDO group or the group that's responsible for analytics. I mean, I think that's been there for a while, I would say. I think I've got a certain slightly different view on this. And by the way, this view is being litigated and it's not a sacrosanct view. It's subject to pushback even within Connection. And I have a lot of folks pushing back on it. And I really do encourage my team members to sort of try and rip apart this idea. There's often this reflexive notion by a lot of us in the data ecosystem that data has got to be perfect. It's got to be packaged. It's got to be right. It's got to be tagged. It's got to be structured. I am beginning to feel less and less that is a preamble for us to have meaningful AI implementation. So I generally have always believed that data is very organic, that data can be dirty, that data can come from sources that we could not have thought of. As we now see a prevalence of sensor-based technologies and IoT-based systems, and you're seeing more edge-level processing, you're going to see data and data types and formats that are not historically in the classic analog sense. They're going to be very diverse and very different. There could be acoustic data that you may be capturing. There could be vibration data. There could be infrared data or heat signatures and so on and so forth. And now when you're looking at the ecosystem as it relates to the DoD ecosystem, that has a very large environmental data footprint that needs to be captured. So I fundamentally believe that as data practitioners, we've got to build standards and mechanisms that allow us to work in an environment that's not always going to be tightly tied up in a bow and a ribbon. And I think what happens is that we often go as organizations through these long cycles of trying to really structure our data to the nth degree and forsake the opportunity costs of those journeys, right? So those journeys could be 5-10 year long efforts for really large, complex organizations. So I'm more of the view that we've got to have very meaningful, structured, what I would call data chunking strategies, where you can identify specific areas of data that have value or worth, and then sort of augment that data. And then try and run efforts in trying to drive greater intelligence, automation, or meaningful AI outputs from that. So I know it's not giving you the exact answer that you're looking for, but I wanted to give you sort of the core construct of a philosophical approach on data and how we want to handle it. And I think AI is more forgiving. If we were doing baseline analytics that we've been trying to do for the last 10, 15 years, whether it's around marketing data, transactional data, manufacturing data, you're absolutely right. You've got to have your data structured. But I think AI gives us the ability to have more unstructured data for us to be able to extract meaningful insights from it. And that's, again, the value of AI. And for those people who understand that, They can take a large set of unstructured data that to a normal analysis seems completely disjointed, but through AI and machine learning, you can find really meaningful insights from that. So I think there needs to be some give and flexibility on the part of data practitioners that for us to drive value, we don't necessarily always need to have our data perfectly aligned.
You say something that really strikes me, that I spend a lot of time at CDO summits, speaking, doing roundtables, things like that. And my experience has been very similar, that the CDO largely is looking at structured data, business analytics data that's been put into, a database or a tool, and they're not quite sure yet how to deal with the unstructured. And one of the trends that's come out is, well, if we can get some metadata assigned around it, so we at least know what we have, that's a great first step. And I think that's kind of what you're saying, like chunking. If you can get some metadata so you can know what you have, then we can start to build some tools around what to do with it. But I've had very similar conversations with the CDO. It's a different set of tools and it's a different practice when you start to move out into this less structured data world. But there's a lot of opportunity there. So I just put that out there for this conversation in this podcast, that there's a big opportunity, but it probably isn't going to fit in the tool bag that most organizations have built around like business intelligence either.
Right. And it's, by the way, it's scar tissue that I've learned through my own experiences, right? So I've seen businesses and organizations that have spent inordinate amount of time and money in building out these really large data warehouses and data lakes and data landing zones. And they're trying to build this really cohesive, well-defined standard data structure in terms of naming conventions and data taxonomies. And they have never thought through over the longer term on how data itself can change. That your environmental ecosystem, what you collect that you could have never thought of, is completely changed. So that impacts your taxonomies, that impacts how you're sort of extracting analytics. So I think as a CDO, if your basic premise is, look, we're going to have data that's going to be, data is organic. It's going to come through different sources. It's going to come in an unclean fashion. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not absolutely making the argument that we should not structure data where structured data is available and leverage that. And if I'm not making that argument, I'm just saying we ought to be a little bit more forgiving and accepting of the fact that data is not always going to be clean. And yet in that unclean data framework or data structure, we're going to find value. And we need to know how to do that. And I think that has meaningful insights for any business that's going down this AI data journey.
That's a great point. So I want to shift topics a little bit as we start to tie up the conversation. You have two hats that you wear, maybe more than that probably, but you in the Helix Center, you talk about applied AI and robotics. How does robotics come into this conversation?
So I think that, again, excellent question. I'll often ask that. The reason why we wanted to put robotics in the moniker was that that's an area that we are absolutely going to double click on. And I think you will see a lot of the large tech firm ecosystem, whether it's NVIDIA and others. In the last GTC, you probably heard Jensen talk about one of his 5 pillars. One of those pillars was robotics. It's like robotics is going to be a meaningful area that they are going to innovate in. And so we certainly want our AI efforts, which is around driving intelligence, to be aligned to that robotic effort. But when we look at the robotic framework approach, we're looking at it in 2 ways. There's the classic, what I would call kinetic robotics. These are robots that, whether they are systems that are on the assembly line helping manufacture products, what we call kinetic robotics. And then there's the robotic process automation. If you ask me today, Helix is more attuned to robotic process automation. And so that is the area that we're stronger on. But with always a keen line of sight around sort of this larger sort of enhanced autonomous robotic process that once we feel that that's reached a level of consistency and commercial value, you will see our center build those skills and have those capabilities. But right now, Helix is more aligned with RPA, process automation, robotic process automation, as opposed to the classic kinetic robots. I think we still have about 3 to 5 years before we will start seeing some meaningful industrial scale robots that require a level of intelligent interaction. And that's when that happens, and if that happens, we'll certainly be in the mix of that as well.
Exciting times for sure. It's amazing the innovation occurring on so many different fronts so quickly right now. So, if our guests who listen to the show are interested in leveraging some of the experience over at Connection, what's the best way to get in touch with you? What kind of customers do you work with? Tell us a little bit more about if they would like to follow up on this conversation with somebody in your organization. How would they do that?
Right. So they can certainly reach out to me through LinkedIn. You can certainly send an email to ai@connection.com. If you are an existing customer, and like I said, I think we've north of 35,000 companies that are our current customers. So they're likely to be one of our customers. Reach out to your account rep and share with them that, hey, I want to do a deeper dive or a double click. And it's great that you call this out, Molly, because we do a lot of what we call workshops with our clients, and they are no encumbrance, no need to buy anything, sort of an open, candid conversation around what's the art of the possible. How can we help you separate hype from reality within your own vertical, within your ecosystem? And that's a value add that we provide to our clients, which is we'll come in, we'll bring some of the smartest, best minds in your verticals, both from a technical applied perspective around AI, as well as from a business perspective. And then we'll have a workshop. And we'll sit down with your execs and we will run through this process of, let's understand the maturity of your data. Let's understand the maturity of your applications. Let's understand your business imperatives. Let's understand your infrastructure, where that sits. And then let's share with you what is possible. And then let the customer and guide them through that process and get them to that, okay, let's do a POC, POV, or just give them greater insight on the direction that they can take. I cannot tell you how many C-level execs I've spoken with who are under this immense pressure, not only from their senior staff, but also from the boards of their companies around what is the company doing around artificial intelligence. I know I'm under pressure from my board and my CEO. And so I've to constantly put together meaningful ROI-based AI projects that we're working on and that are having meaningful impact on the business. So those are the things that we would do and would love to sort of engage with our customers.
So Jamal, at these workshops, it sounds like there's some really great conversations that occur. Does this help an organization figure out how they're going to monetize their AI project? Is that part of the outcome?
The part of the outcome is these are ROI-based, business outcome-driven AI projects. And so there are two elements to it. One could be, how do we leverage artificial intelligence to either automate certain processes, make ourselves more efficient internally? And the other could certainly be, how do we monetize AI through our interaction with our customers? So for some of our customers who may be retail organizations, how do we effectively build an in-store ecosystem that gives the best personalized shopping experience to a customer in an environment that's becoming so online, right? So retailers with large retail footprints have significant challenges on, one, how to reduce cost, how to reduce shrinkage, and how to make that retail experience more personalized. And that's where artificial intelligence can come in and help and analyze that and then provide some mechanisms to deliver on that. So again, ROI, both from an internal perspective, but also ROI based upon how you interact with your customers. So yes, these workshops do try and arrive at those conclusions and give that guidance and those guidelines.
Excellent. I know both from the executive level of trying to drive, we need an AI strategy, and you also want to know that you're going to, be able to make money or monetize is really difficult. So that makes a lot of sense. Is there anything else that you would like to leave people with?
So I think there's one thing that I really like to double click on, and it's something that I share with my team members. It's a cultural ethos that I often drive. And I think as AI practitioners, we have to express this consistently, which, one, there's certainly what we would call the technical considerations around how AI is developed and deployed, the quality of your data, the potential bias that might exist in your data. We, as practitioners, don't want to build a system that has built-in algorithmic bias or some other sort of concerns around privacy and so on and so forth. And those are often technical underpinnings. But then there's social and ethical considerations that I think are very, very important. And everything we do at Helix, and it's a core component of our culture, that we've got to build AI systems that are being leveraged in an ethical fashion, that are looking at issues around social equity and what that represents, and can build upon this public perception and trust around AI. Now, having said that, I think I'm not generally of the ilk to have happy ears about everything, and I'm not going to necessarily be one that's constantly beating the drums of AI and its value. There is a potential negative side to AI that we ought to also keep in mind, and there's for folks in our positions, it's more probably a question for some of the policymakers who are building policies at a federal or national or state level, which is absolutely what I would call the job displacement and job impacts that AI is going to have. I know there's often this politically correct response, which is AI is going to come, but it's going to create a lot of jobs. I often hear a lot of AI practitioners sort of try and get through this conversation faster by just expressing it in those terms that, we shouldn't worry. Like anything else in the past, the new technology brought in a whole bunch of new jobs. I'm not discounting that there are not going to be new jobs like prompt engineers, new jobs like folks who are building some of these systems that we talked about. But there is no question in my mind that AI is going to displace a lot of jobs, and jobs that are white-collar jobs, not just, repetitive, blue-collar jobs. And I think that is going to bring a societal impact that really needs to be considered at a policy level, at a general national level. And having been privy to a lot of these conversations at a national level, I find there to be a lack of consistency in the approach and the policy development. So that's a big concern. So I'd like to leave those thoughts, at least, in the minds of practitioners, policymakers, anyone else who listens to this podcast, that we've really got to come together and try and build a unified approach on how this technology is going to be deployed and the impact that's going to have and how we address our society and get it prepared for that.
Yeah, really interesting things to consider. And I think wise words of not just advice, but also a challenge to those involved at these levels. So, Jamal, thank you for taking the time and sharing both your experience as well as your insights into this kind of complex world as it evolves. Appreciate you joining the show.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for the invite, Molly. It was good to be on.
Thanks for listening to Data Unchained, powered by Hammerspace. To learn more, visit hammerspace.com. If you have a guest you would like to hear on the show, email me at molly@hammerspace.com.